Hey guys, Taufik here. Now on my channel, I have just created 3 new playlists where in the next couple of months, I will be posting several different videos of solving SQL queries. So basic, intermediate and complex SQL queries. Now, if you have an SQL query that you would like me to make a video about and you would like me to include that SQL query in this particular playlist, then definitely share with me your SQL query. You can email me your SQL query. My email ID is in the video description. Now in this video, I'm going to be solving a very popular data analytics problem, that is, how do you remove duplicate data from your database? Now, when I say duplicate data, there can be two different scenarios. The first scenario is that data is duplicated based on certain columns in your table. So not every column has duplicate data, but some of the columns in your table has duplicate data. Okay. And the second scenario is that every single column in your table has duplicate data. Now, the solution to remove duplicate data in both these scenarios may be different, and I'm going to be giving you multiple different solutions for both of these scenarios. So I'm going to give you 7 different solutions for scenario 1, and I'm going to give you 3 different solutions for scenario 2. Okay. Now, before I can start, I would like to mention that all the scripts, data sets, SQL queries, everything you can download it for free from my blog. The link to my blog is in the video description. Okay. Now let's get started. Okay, so let's start by looking at scenario 1, which is basically data is duplicated based on some of the columns. Okay, now in order to explain this, I have created a cars table which has information about some of the electric cars. As you can see here, this is my table. So I have an ID column which basically has unique ID for every single record. Then I have the model, which basically is the car name. Then the brand of the car is mentioned here. Then I have the color of the car and the make of the car. Okay. Now let's say you have been given a requirement where you need to write a query to delete duplicate data from the cars table. Okay. And they have told us that duplicate record is identified based on the model and the brand name. Okay. So what this means is not every column needs to have duplicate data in order for the entire record to be considered as duplicated. Okay, even if you can find records where the model and the brand are duplicated, we can treat the entire record to be duplicated, and we need to find such duplicate records and we need to remove them from the cars table. Okay, now in this particular table we can see that we have Ioniq 5 which belongs to the brand Hyundai, and I have 2 different records for the same car. And for Tesla Model S, again, I have 2 different records. Okay. Now, based on my requirement for this particular query, I can treat that these 2 records are duplicated, and similarly, these 2 records are duplicated, even though their IDs are actually different. Okay, but based on the model and the brand, we can say that these 2 records are duplicated and these 2 are duplicated. Okay, now I'm going to give you 6 different solutions to remove duplicate data from your table, and I'm going to start with the solution 1. That is, I'm going to give you a solution by using a unique identifier. Okay, now before you can remove duplicate data from your table, the very first thing that you need to do is you need to write a select statement to identify the duplicate records. Okay, so write a select query which is going to fetch the duplicate records, and then over that select query you can simply write a delete statement to delete those records, right? So our first task is to identify the duplicate data from the cars table. So I'm just going to say select star from cars. Okay, I'm just going to say star, and if I execute, I'm getting all of these records. Now, one of the easiest ways to identify duplicate records in a table is by using the group by clause. So I'm just going to be using that. So I'm just going to say group by model comma brand. Okay, and let's say for now I'm just going to use the same columns in my select clause, and I'm just going to say count of star. Okay, and if I execute this, now we can see that for every unique combination of model and brand, one group is being created, and in that group I have applied this count aggregate function, which basically is going to count for the combination of these 2 values how many records are present in the cars table. Okay, so SQL is telling that for BMW iX there is just 1 record, for Model S which belongs to Tesla there are 2 records, Hyundai Ioniq 5 has 2 records, and Mercedes-Benz EQS has 1 record. Okay, now with this I have created a group and I have told you how many records are present in each group, right? Now what I need to do is I only need to fetch the duplicated records, right? How I can do that is I can just use a having clause and put a filter condition here telling that having of count of a star is greater than 1. Okay, so I'll get only the records where for the combination of model and brand, there are multiple records in this table. So if I execute this, you can see that I'm getting the desired 2 records. Now I have got this, and I know that for each of these records, there is 2 records for this Tesla Model S and 2 records of Hyundai Ioniq 5. The ID is different for all of these records. So for example, if I go and query from my cars table, you can see that even though Ioniq 5 has 2 records, their IDs are different. And even though Tesla Model S has 2 records, their IDs are different. And when I'm deleting duplicate records, I should not be deleting both these records. I only need to delete the duplicated record. So among these 2 Tesla Model S, I have an entry for ID 1 and I have an entry for ID 5. I only need to delete this one and I only need to delete this one. So how I can do that is using this same query, I can use another aggregate function, that is max. And here I can tell max of ID. So by using max, what I'm telling SQL is you only fetch the record where the ID is max among this group. That is, among this Ioniq 5, the record with the max ID is this one, right? 6. And the same thing will happen for Model S, right? Now if I execute this, you can see that I am getting the record where the ID is 5 and 6. And these are the actual records that I want to delete. Right. So now once I have basically got the exact record that I want to delete, what I can do is I can just put a delete statement here. So I can just tell delete from cars, and I can put a filter condition here saying that ID is in whatever ID that I have got from my query here. So I'll put this entire thing into a subquery. Okay. And I'm just going to close the parenthesis here, and since I'm only matching it with the ID, I'll remove these 2 columns because I only need the ID here. Okay. So if I execute this, I will get the 2 IDs, that is 5 and 6. And now if I execute this entire query, you can see that delete 2, meaning that 2 records are deleted. And now if I go back and query from my cards table, you can see that the 2 duplicated records have been deleted. I now only have unique records in this particular table. Okay, so this is solution 1, pretty simple, right? Now, I think most of you guys would know this solution, but generally what happens is when you go to an interview, the interviewer might not just ask you for one solution, they might ask for multiple different solutions. So what is another solution of deleting duplicate records from your table? Okay, now the second solution that I'm going to be giving you is by using something called as a self join. Okay, so again, before I can delete duplicate records, the very first thing that I need to do is I need to write a query to identify the duplicate records, right? Okay, but before that, since I have already removed the duplicate record, I'm again going to repopulate this table with the duplicate records. And that is by using this insert statement. So I'm just going to insert duplicate entries again. Okay. And now if I look into my cars table, you can see that again, the duplicate data has been inserted. So now let's go into my solution 2. That is using self join. So again, I need to write a query to identify duplicate records, right? So let's try to do that. And since I'm telling I'm going to be using a self join, what I'll do is I'll fetch the data from my cards table. I'm going to call it like C1, and I'm going to join the same table to itself. Okay. And I'm going to say cars again. I'm going to give an alias for this like C2. And now I need to give a join condition. So I know that my final intention is to find those records where the data is duplicated, right? So I can actually join these 2 tables using the duplicated columns, that is model and brand, right? So I can just tell C1.model equal to C2.model, okay? And C1.brand is equal to C2.brand, okay? This is fine, okay? Now what happens is, basically I will join the same table to itself, and wherever the model and the brand are same, it's going to make a join. But the problem is I do not want the same record of C1 to match with the same record of C2, right? Because if I just do this, every single record gets matched. So if I run this, you can see that I'll get many records. I'm getting 10 records. I don't want that to happen. So I want to add a filter condition here telling that when I'm doing a match, for example, if I have to show it to you more clearly using an Excel file, okay, so I have this simple diagram here. So I have this, you can consider like my C1 and this is C2. Basically, they are the same table. Since I'm doing a self join, I'm joining the same table to itself, and I'm joining it based on the model and the brand column, right? So I was hoping that only the duplicated data will get matched, but the problem is this, let's say EQS is also present here and here. So even that will get matched. IX is present here as well as here. So basically every single record from this table will get matched with every single record from this table, right? I don't want that to happen. I only want to match the duplicated records. So what I can do is I can use this ID column. So I can tell only make a join. So for example, I can just tell c1.id is less than c2.id. Okay, and let's say if I run this, now you can see that I'm only getting the duplicated record, and from here, instead of fetching the data from both the tables, I can just tell c2 dot star. Okay, and now if I run this, you can see that I'm getting only these two records with ID 5 and 6. These two are the duplicated record. How did this happen is, if I go back to Excel, when SQL is processing, it's going to take the first record from C1 and it's going to match it with all the 6 records from C2. Okay, since I have this filter condition saying that C1.id is less than C2.id, so this ID is 1 and this ID has to be less than the ID from the C2 table. So this record will not get matched, but all these 5 records will get matched. Okay, so if I just have to highlight, I will just put a mark here. I will just tell something like this record will get matched with all these 5 records. And even here, what happens is not every record gets matched because the joining is based on model and brand, right? So among these 5 records, SQL is going to check model S, where is model S present? So this one. So this one will only match with this one, right? So let's say if I highlight this here, so basically these both. Okay, so this record here will only get matched with this record here. Okay, and that is why it's only going to return this model S record. Okay, similarly from the first record, when it's going to process here and here, it's not going to find any match. Okay, but when it comes to Ionic 5, it's going to find a match. Okay, so I hope you get an idea of how self join works. So basically by writing a query something like this, I'm able to fetch the data that I want. And from here, I don't need to fetch every single column. I'm only interested in the ID. Okay, so I'm just going to say c2.id, that is 5 and 6. And then again, like what I did in previous solution, I can just say delete from cars. Okay, where ID is in this whatever ID that I have got from my self join subquery. Okay, so if I just put that here, and if I put a semicolon here, and if I run this, I think 2 records will get deleted. And now if I go back to my cards table, you can see that I'm only having the unique records, so duplicate records have been deleted. Okay, so this is solution 2. I hope this is clear by using a self join, and this method will probably, okay, in fact both this method will work in any of the RDBMS. Okay, now let's go into solution 3, and we are going to be using a window function. Okay, so let's see how I can delete duplicate records using window function. Again, the very first step that I need to do is to write a select statement to identify the duplicated records, right? So I'm just going to say select star from cars. Okay, that is star. And let's say if I execute this, I'll get this. Okay, so I deleted the duplicate records in the previous solution. So first of all, let me repopulate the duplicate entries by running this insert. And now let me run my select statement. So now I have the duplicate records. So now what I need to do is I'm going to be using window function to delete duplicate records. First of all, let's identify the duplicate records. Now the window function that I'm going to be using here is called as row number. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to basically partition the data based on these duplicated columns, that is model and brand, and then I'm going to give a row number. Okay, wherever there are duplicate records, the row number is going to be basically there will be a record with row number 1 and there will be other records with row number greater than 1. Okay, and then I can only filter the data based on that row number greater than 1. Right, so what I'll do here is I'll just put an over clause, and I need to partition the data based on this model and brand. Right, so I'm just going to say partition by model comma brand. Okay, and then I'll say, okay, maybe order by is not required in this particular case because I'm not bothered in which order they get sorted. And here I'll just give a name like RN. And now if I run this, now you can see that for this Ionic 5, you can see I have one record with the row number 1 and the duplicated record is having the row number 2. Okay, and the same thing with Tesla Model S. There is the original record has row number 1 and the duplicated record has row number 2. Right, now what I can do is I can just put this into a subquery. So I can just tell select star from, okay, I can open a parenthesis here and let me move this to the right, and let's say I'll give an alias for this x, and here I can just tell x.rn is greater than 1. Okay, so even if there are multiple duplicate records, this method should work. Okay, and now you can see that I'm getting the duplicated records, and here again I'm only interested in fetching the ID column. So I'm just going to fetch the ID column here, and if I run this, you can see I'm getting 5 and 6. again, in order to delete these records, I can just use a simple delete statement. So delete from cars, okay, where ID in this whatever ID that I have got from this subquery, right? So I'll just close this, give an alias for this. Okay, maybe not required. And I think that's all. Now, if I run this, you can see that 2 records have been deleted. So if I go back and query from my cards table, you can see that I have removed the duplicate records. Okay, so this is the solution 3 using window function. I am actually going a little faster. The reason is because I need to show you 10 different solutions, and I think these are all pretty simple queries you should be able to grasp. Now let's move on to the solution 4. So the next solution that I'm going to give you is actually a very good solution. So this is a solution that would work even if you had multiple duplicate records. Okay. Now before I get into this solution, the first thing that I'll do is I'll repopulate the duplicate records by running this insert statement. And now I'll query the data from the cards table. Now you can see I have the duplicate data. So the fourth solution is by using the minimum aggregate function, and as mentioned here, this will delete even if there are multiple duplicate records. Okay, so for example, I will run the insert statement one more time. Okay, so hopefully there should be multiple duplicate entries now. Now you can see I have 8 records in this table. So you can see Ionic 5 is now repeated 3 times, Model S is repeated 3 times. Right? So let's look at this solution 4 now. Again, the first thing that I generally have done is to identify the duplicate records, right? But in this case, we'll try to do it slightly differently. Instead of identifying the duplicate records, let's try to identify the unique records first. Okay, so kind of like let's try to find out the original record first, and then whatever records does not belong to this original list, we'll try to delete them. Okay, so how we can do that is I'm just going to say select star from cars. I'll just tell group by model, brand. Okay, and let's say if I am going to put it in the select clause, and if I run this, you can see that I'm basically getting all of this model and car names here. Okay, and from this, if I just do an aggregate function saying that minimum of ID, okay, minimum of ID will basically be the ID of the very first record that was inserted, right? So if I run this, now we can see that the ID that I have got is 1, 2, 3, and 4. So looks like these were the first 4 IDs that got inserted into the table. So I want to maintain these 4 records, but any other record present in the table other than these 4 IDs, I want to delete them. Okay, this is the logic that I will be using. So what I can do here is I can just tell select star from cars, okay, where ID not in whatever the list that I have got. Okay, so here if I just execute this, okay, so I don't need these columns here. Okay, and now if I just run this, now you can see that I have got these duplicated entries, that is model as Ionic 5. You can see the ID is 5, 6 and 5, 6 because I did multiple inserts here. Okay, so this is basically one way. If you have a table with multiple duplicate records, then I think this is a better way of doing that. You can also do that by using row number function, what I showed previously, but this is also one way of doing that. Okay, now again, in order to delete this statement, I can just tell delete, okay, not here, I still need this. So I can just tell select ID, okay, from the cards, I have this ID. So then I can put a delete statement here telling that delete from cards where ID in. Okay, so I can have this. I think this is redundant. I can basically remove this. Okay, so what I'll do is, okay, again, I'll just remove this delete statement here. And instead of having a select statement here, I can just tell delete from cards where ID not in this one. Okay, so here I got the 4 IDs, which basically is the ID of the original record. Any other IDs that got inserted into the table are duplicated records. So I'm just going to include only those IDs and I'm going to delete them. Okay, so now if I execute this, you can see 4 records have been deleted. So if I go back to my main query, select star from cars, you can see that these are the 4 records, basically the unique records that are preserved in the table. Okay, so this is actually solution 4, where you can use the minimum function to remove not just one duplicate records but multiple duplicate records. I hope all of this is clear. Now let's come to a 5th solution, that is by creating a backup table. Okay, so again, before I can show you the solution, let's try to create some duplicate entry. So I'm just going to execute the insert statement, and then let's do a select from the cars table. So I have this data. Let's go back to my solution 5, and I'm telling solution 5 is basically using a backup table. Okay, now an alternate way of deleting duplicate data, and I think this is a faster way of doing it, because generally if you are using a delete statement, and if you have to delete, let's say, thousands of records, the delete statement might take a lot of time. Sometimes when we are bothered with performance and we are working on some development environments, we basically do is we create a backup table, then we drop the original table, then we basically rename the backup table to the original table. Okay, so there is a problem with this approach, because if you're working on a production environment, you basically cannot drop some existing table which is currently being used by your application, right? But when you're working on some development environment or for some testing projects, this is a method that you can follow. Okay, so let's try to do that. So first of all, I'm going to create a backup table. So I'm just going to say create table cards underscore BKP. Okay, I'll say as, and I'll say select star from cards table. Okay, now first of all, I want to create this backup table as an empty table. I do not want it to have any data. So what I can do is I can just tell where 1 is equal to 2. So this will always return 0 records, right? So this will basically create the backup table with the same structure as this cards table. Okay, so I'll execute this. Now the backup table is created. The next thing is to populate this backup table with the unique data from the cards table. So how do I identify unique data from the cards table? So I'm just going to say select star from cards. Now, one of the way of identifying the unique records, or basically the original record, is by using the solution that I provided in the previous step. That is, I can just use this subquery here. So what I'll do is I'll just come here from the cards table where ID is in. So in this case, I'm going to put in, and then I'll put this subquery. Okay, so this subquery here is basically grouping the data based on model and brand. It's going to fetch the minimum of ID, which basically is the original records that got inserted into this table, right? So I'll put this entire thing into a subquery, and I'm going to fetch all the data from the cards table from this particular, which belongs to this ID, right? So now if I execute this, this will basically give me the 4 records from the table, which are the original records. So let's say, okay, if you see the actual cards table, there are 6 records, right? But because I'm only fetching the IDs which basically is the minimum of ID for each of this combination of model and brand, I'm only getting the 4 IDs which were originally present without considering the duplicate records, right? So this will basically give me the unique records from the table. Then what I need to do is I just need to do an insert of all of this record into my backup table. So insert into cards underscore BKP, okay, and then this whole select statement. So if I execute this, the insert 4 has happened. That means 4 records have been inserted. So the next step that what I need to do is, now what basically I have done is I had the cards table which has the duplicate records. I created a backup table with the same structure as a cards table. Then I loaded all the unique records from the cards table into the cards backup table. Next thing is I will drop the cards table. So drop table cards. Okay. I have dropped the table, and then I'll alter the table cards underscore BKP, that is cards backup table, and I'll rename to the cards table. So basically I'm going to rename the backup table into the original table name. So if I execute this, now the backup table has been renamed as cards. And now if I query the data from the cards table, you can see that I'm only having the unique records. Okay, so this is one way of removing duplicate records, but there is a problem here, and this is not the way to remove duplicate records, especially if you're working in a production environment, because this cards might be a table that is being used by some of your application. If you drop a table that is currently being used in your application may crash, right? So this is not a very good approach. This can be used when you're internally doing some processing or some testing, and you want to delete the data like thousands of data or millions of data very quickly. Then this is going to do it very quickly. Okay, but an alternate way of doing the same approach would be my solution 6. So let's come back to solution 6. Here almost half of the things that I'm going to be doing is the same. So what I'll do is I'll just copy all of this here, and I'll just paste it here. Okay, because the initial step, so I think first of all I do not have a cards backup table here. because I already renamed it to cars, but I think I do not have duplicate data. So first of all, let me insert these two duplicate data and then check my cars table. Okay, now I have duplicate data. Now let's go back to solution 6. So now let's go ahead and create the backup table. So I have created the empty backup table. Now I'm going to insert the unique records into the backup table. Okay, the next step I did in the previous solution was to drop the cars table, but rather than dropping, an alternate way is we can just empty the cars table. So what I can do is I can just tell truncate table cars. So all the data from cars is truncated, and now I can insert the data, insert into cars from my backup table. So select star from cars underscore BKP, because if I see my cars backup, I have the unique records. And now if I execute this, you can see that unique records have been moved into my cars, that is my original table. And then I can drop the backup table. So drop table cars underscore BKP, and I have dropped this. And now if I go and query from my cars table, you can see that I have this unique records. Okay, so this is my solution 6. How you can remove duplicate records from your table. Okay, I hope all of this is clear. I hope it is not too fast. I'm going to be sharing all the solution in my blog. Now all these 6 solutions was for a scenario where the data is duplicated based on some columns. And if you see carefully, all of these solutions, I have used the ID column to basically remove the duplicate data. Okay, except for maybe I think even here in the solution 5 and 6 also I have used the ID column. But now let's look at the scenario 2 where the ID column also may be duplicated. In that case, how would you remove duplicate records? So to explain that, I'll open a new tab here. I have the same table created, but in this case, I have basically duplicated the data, not just for the model and the brand column, but for every column. You can see here, I have this Ioniq 5 belonging to Hyundai, and you can see even the ID is the same. The color is the same, the make is the same, everything is the same. And the same thing for Tesla Model S, the ID, brand, model and every other column are all same. Okay, so now all this method that we have used to remove duplicate data will not work because even the ID is duplicated. If I try to delete the data based on ID, not just the duplicate record, but even the original record also will get deleted, right? So for this kind of cases, I'm going to give you 4 solutions of how you can remove duplicate data. Okay, so the first solution that I'm going to be giving you is something called by using the CTID. Now this CTID is basically something called like an row ID. Okay, and this CTID is only available in PostgreSQL. Okay, if you're using PostgreSQL, then you can use this particular column to remove duplicate data. But if you're using Oracle, then similar to CTID, in Oracle we have something called as row ID. Okay, so row ID in Oracle. But unfortunately, as far as I know, in MySQL and in Microsoft SQL Server, we do not have alternative to these two unique IDs. Okay, so what exactly is this? I'm going to explain now. So let's do a select star from my cars table. Okay, and if I execute this, you can see that I'm having 6 records. Now in PostgreSQL, every time you create a table, internally PostgreSQL is going to create a pseudo column which is called as CTID. It's basically going to assign a unique row ID for every single record in your table. Okay, you don't create it, PostgreSQL creates it, and internally it will maintain it. Okay, similar to that, in Oracle we have something called as a row ID. Okay, so for example here, if I just do CTID and if I execute this, even though in my table I did not create CTID, it's still showing up here because this is something that internally PostgreSQL has created. Okay, and this is going to have a unique value for every record. Okay, the value here is in the form of a tuple. Okay, so now what we can do is I can basically delete the data from this table using the same approach that I followed in solution 1. So now instead of rewriting the entire query, what I'll do is, just to save time, this was a solution 1 where I have deleted duplicate records by using the unique identifier that was ID, right? So I'll just copy this entire query here. Okay, and I'll just try to paste it here, and here I'll not use ID. Why can't I use ID? Because even ID is duplicated in this case, right? So here you can see I'm getting max of ID as 1 and 4, because if I go here for both these records, okay, so let's say if I execute this, you can see that both Ioniq 5 is having the ID as 4, right? If I try to delete the data based on ID, both these records will get deleted. I don't want that to happen. So what I'll do is, instead of using ID, I'll use this CTID. Okay, and here also I'll use CTID. Now if I execute this, you see the CTID here. Okay, so for example, I'll just show you the CTID here. So I think for this, right? So you can see the CTID is 0,6 and the CTID here is 0,4. The CTID is actually different, right? So I'm going to use that. Now if I execute this subquery here, you can see that the max of CTID for the duplicated records are 5 and 6, right? Now if I execute this whole statement, the duplicated records will get deleted. And now if I execute from this particular table, you can see that I'm having the unique records. So this is solution one. When every column is duplicated, we can use something called as CTID. The query is almost the same that I used when I was using the ID column, but this will only work in PostgreSQL because CTID is supported in PostgreSQL, and in Oracle we can use row ID, right? Just replace CTID with row ID and it will work. But in MySQL and Microsoft SQL, this approach will not work. Then what is the other solution? So for that, I'm going to give you a solution 2, which basically will work in any RDBMS. So it does not matter whether it is MySQL, Microsoft SQL Server, Oracle, PostgreSQL or any other. This solution 2 is basically going to work in any RDBMS. So before I can show you the solution 2, first of all, since I already removed the duplicate data in my solution 1, I need to repopulate the table with some duplicate entries. So I'm going to rerun this insert statement. And now if I run my select query, you can see that the duplicate data has now been populated here. Now let's come back to my solution 2 and see how I can write a query which is going to remove duplicate data without using CTID, and which should probably work in MySQL, Microsoft SQL Server, etc. Okay, the solution is, since I do not have any column with unique identifier, I'm going to create a temporary unique ID column. Okay, so I'll create a temporary unique ID column, and using that unique ID column, I'm going to do the delete. And after my delete of duplicate record is done, then I will drop this temporary column. Okay, so let's try to do that. So first of all, I'm going to alter my table. So alter table cards. Okay, add column, and I'll just tell my column name would be something like let's say row underscore number. Okay, or row num. Okay, it's going to be an integer, and I'm going to auto populate this column with unique values using the identity function. Okay, so I'm just going to say int generated always as identity. Okay, and this identity column or function is basically supported in every RDBMS. I think the syntax might be slightly different, but it is supported in every other RDBMS. Okay, so let me just execute this, and you can see the alter table is successful. And now if I go and query from my cards table, you can see that a new column has been added, and this value here is all unique. So now once I have this, I can remove the duplicate records by using this row number column. So again, instead of rewriting the query, I'll just reuse the query that I already wrote in the previous solution. So I'll just paste it here. Okay, and instead of CTID, I'm going to be using the new column that I created. Okay, so row number, that is row number here. And now so before I execute, I'll just execute this subquery here. You can see it's returning 5 and 6. Okay, the ID of the or basically the row number of the duplicated records. And now if I run the delete statement, you can see 2 records are deleted. And if I go back and query from the cards table, you can see only the unique records are present. But this new column is still present here. Now the last step here, what we need to do is we need to again alter the table cards, and I need to say drop column row underscore num. Okay, and now if I do this, you can see my column is dropped. And if I execute from cards table, now this is exactly how the table was prior to I created this column, right? So this is an alternate solution, and this solution should probably work in any RDBMS. So if you have duplicate data in every single column, this is a pretty good solution that you can use everywhere. I hope this was clear. Now let's go back to my solution 3. Okay, and this solution is again by using a backup table. This time it's going to be much simpler because every column is duplicated, right? So before that, let's repopulate the table with some duplicate records and query the table. So you can see I have this duplicate entries. Now let's go back to my solution. I think that is this one, creating the solution by creating a backup table. So what I'm going to do here is, in this step, I'm going to create a backup table. But when I'm creating the backup table itself, I'm going to load it with the unique records. So what I mean is, I'm just going to say create a table. I'll say cards underscore BKP as, and here I'll just tell select distinct star from cars. Okay, because every column is duplicated, right? So if I do a distinct of star, I will get the unique records. Here I don't need to do a subquery with max and etc. Just a distinct of star is going to return me unique records because every single column is duplicated, right? And using this query, I can create my table. So here, not just the table is created, but the data with basically with the proper unique record is also created. So if I do a select star from cards backup, you can see that I have the table with the proper data here. And the next step is again pretty simple. I just drop the original table, drop table cars. Okay. And then I just rename the backup table to the original table. So I just tell alter table cars underscore BKP rename to cars. Okay. And that's all. Now if I query the data from my, so let's say if I query the data from my cars table, you will see the 4 unique records. Okay, so this is one of the solution. Again, the problem is that you are dropping the original table. If the table was used in your application, your application is going to crash. An alternative way is my solution 4. So in solution 4, again, I'm going to be creating a backup table. So what I'll do is, okay, first of all, let's repopulate the table with some duplicate data. Okay, and let's look at my query the cars table. I have duplicate data. And then I'll just basically copy all of this step here. So I'll just copy into step 4 because the solution 4 is almost similar to solution 3. So I create a backup table by doing this query, that is select distinct of cars. So if I remove distinct, you can see that I have duplicate data, 6 records here. But in order to remove the duplicate data, I just put a distinct here. Okay. And then by this will basically fetch me all the unique records. And from this query, I'm going to create my backup table using this particular syntax. So my backup table is created with the proper data. The next step is, instead of dropping the original table, I'll just truncate the original table, truncate table cars. Okay. And then I'll just populate my original table from the backup table. So insert into cars, select star from cards underscore BKP. If I execute this, cards table is populated. And the last step is I just need to drop table cards underscore BKP. Okay, so that's all. And now if I execute from my cards table, if I query the data from my cards table, you can see I have the unique records. Okay, so that's all. These were the 10 different solutions that I wanted to show you. I hope this is clear, and these are all pretty simple queries. That is why I have gone very fast. If you like this video, please give me a like and leave your feedback in the comments below. If you have any queries that you would like me to solve, please share them in my email. I will be adding a lot more videos into this playlist. So anyone who wants to attend an interview or wants to practice SQL, this would be the 3 playlists that you can always refer to. Okay, so thank you very much for watching and see you soon in the next one. Bye.